So now that we have our rubber, plastic and metal materials set up, we can get started and apply some decals to this mesh to make it even more interesting. Now, the decals that I am using are created by this artist called Angian Lucian. I hope I didn't butcher his name here. I basically purchased these 3 decal packs, the decals volume 3, volume 2 and volume 1 down here. They're $5 each, and it's just a ton of decals that they come with. And the reason why I'm doing that is simply because I want to save on time. I don't want to have to sit down for like 2 days and design a bunch of decals. And by just purchasing them, first of all, they all kind of like belong to the same family. So visually they're similar and they fit in the same universe, and I don't have to worry about them not matching when I apply them to the mesh. And then again, it's just a matter of time. I can spend $15 and just get these decals and apply them to my projects, or I can spend 2 days sitting down and designing them myself, which is gonna cost me much more in time than the $15 that I'm gonna spend on this. He has them on ArtStation here. So if you just Google for his name, you should find it, or on Gumroad. I recommend purchasing it on Gumroad because the artist gets a bigger cut, just for your information. So if you want to get them on Gumroad. If you don't want to get them and you want to design your own decals, that's perfectly fine as well. But for me, it's just quicker to purchase them and save on time. So here's a folder where I saved out all the decals that I'm going to use. Some of them I've slightly modified, but for the most part, I just kept it as is. And there's usually 1 or 2 versions for each decal. And I'll explain later on why for some of them you need 2 versions. If you have a decal with color in it, like this one here, where you can see, this black background is going to turn transparent, but everything in here, there's various different colors. There's yellow, there's white, and there's black. And for these ones, you need an alpha channel as well. So I have this texture that just has the color information called color. And then I have the texture that's just the alpha information called alpha. And then I have other types of decals that are just graphic elements, like this guy over here, that is just a black and white image. And for that one, I don't need a color channel because the alpha channel and the color channel basically matches just the same information that goes in here. So again, for every decal with color, I have a color and an alpha channel, and for black and white decals, it's just the alpha channel. Also, what you want to do is, like if you have a decal like this, and here's the alpha channel to it, so you can see that this kind of stuff is visible, and then this kind of stuff turns transparent. So you want to make sure when you do something like that, that whatever is on your background matches that pixel on the border of the alpha channel, so that you don't get a white line here on the outline. So you want to make sure that the background just matches that transition. So now that we went through all of the decals, let's go into Substance Painter and take a look at different methods, how we can apply those to the mesh. So to add decals to Substance Painter, you can either go to File and then Import Resources, and then go to Add Resources and navigate to the directory where you saved out your decals, or you can just drag and drop the files into Substance Painter. So let's say I want to use this decal here. I can just left click and drag, and then bring it in here. And then the decals, if it's a black and white image, which is the alpha channel, or if it's one of the versions of your decal that has a color and alpha channel, you need to make sure you bring it in the correct way. So anything that's going to be used as an alpha channel needs to be set to alpha in here. So instead of texture, you're going to use alpha. And then down here where it says import your resources to, you can choose what Substance Painter is going to do with the file. Now, if you set this to current session, it will only import the file for this current session, and it'll show up in your shelf. And then once you close Substance Painter and reload it, it won't be in your library anymore. If you set it to project, then it will always be saved with the file. So if you reopen that file, you will have it. And if you set it to shelf, it will be saved in your Substance Painter shelf, and you can use it in other projects as well. I'm just going to use current session for this because it's not a big deal to like import these, but you can use project or shelf. And then let's click on import. And then you can see down here, the decal will show up, and we have now imported the texture into Substance Painter, and we can start using it. So before we do anything, let's create a new folder set, move it all the way up, and then call that one decals. And then in here, we are going to create a paint layer because we're going to paint the decals onto the mesh. So left click on add paint layer. and then it's going to take a second, and then you have that new decal layer. And so this decal is called decal graph 01. So let's call that layer decal graph 01, and left click and drag that into the decal folder. Now we are going to use the decal in a brush alpha. So switch over here to alpha, and then you're going to left click and drag the alpha shape into the alpha slot here. And you also want to left click and drag it into the base color slot. And then we're going to turn off color, we're going to turn off height, roughness, metalness, and normal information. So we're just going to have the decal in the alpha and in the base color slot. And now you can see when I go over my mesh, this decal shows up. And then if you choose an area that you can paint on, which is this area over here, you can just left click on your mesh and the decal will be stamped onto your geometry. So super helpful stuff. So the reason why we're using this setup over here should become clear in a little bit, but for now let's just keep going with what we're doing, and let's just start applying the decals. Now it's important to find a good spot for them, and I think for this guy I'm just going to apply this decal to the sides here. So what we're going to do is with Control and right mouse button, we're going to increase the size of the decal. And then we need to make sure that it sort of like fits here into the middle of this design or of this element on my mesh. And then now I need to make sure that I position it in the correct place on all of the sides. So it's always good to kind of like find a reference point when you stamp those decals. And for this one, I'm going to make sure that the bottom of my brush circle lines up with this circular line down here. So you can see here this circular element, and then you can see that the bottom of my brush lines up with that black and white transition. And then I'm just moving it sort of in the center of everything, and I'm just gonna have to eyeball it as good as or as much as I can. And then all I'm doing is I'm pressing left mouse button to commit the decal. And then let's move on to the other side and keep going. Now we need to do this for all three sides, obviously. So same thing here, line it up at the bottom, and then find the center, and then just left mouse button to commit. And let's do it over here as well. Find the black line at the bottom. And then you can also shift and right mouse button to move the light around if you need to see the outline of this piece a little bit better, so that you can center it. And looks like it's about here. So left mouse button to commit. And then you can see now we have applied this decal to all three elements of my mesh. And if I press F3, you can see the decal has been applied. And it's roughly in the same spot in each location. So we can just do a quick sanity check and look over here. And from looking at it from different perspective, it doesn't really stand out to me as being in the wrong position. Like it's perfectly aligned to me, or not perfectly aligned, but almost perfectly aligned. So let's leave it at that for this. So let's take a look at how these paint layers actually work and what we can do to influence the look of these decals. So right now in our paint layer, you can see that we only have the color information active, which means whatever I'm going to paint is just going to project color information onto the mesh. And once I've painted it, I can also turn on these afterwards. But then once I modify it, it doesn't actually affect our mesh. So you can see changing these sliders doesn't do anything, because it's only going to change anything for the next decal I'm going to stamp on. So if I do another stamp, so I have to go back to this area and stamp, you can see now that I've added roughness and height information, the decal also has roughness and height information. But it's a destructive process, which means if I change the values afterwards, the ones I've already painted won't update. And that's not what I want. I want to be able to paint and then make changes to the attributes afterwards. So we have to use a little workaround. And the workaround that we are going to use are anchor points in Substance Painter. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rename this layer to anchor. And what an anchor point is, it basically allows you to reuse the information in that layer in a different layer in Substance Painter. So we can reference the information in that layer. So in order to be able to do that, we need to create an anchor point first. And the way to do it is to right click on the layer. And then down here, you just click on Add Anchor Point. And then you can see it already created it, and it's called Decal Grav R1 Anchor. So now we have an anchor point that we can reference in other layers. So what we can do next is we can just add a new fill layer. And then let's copy the name and call that Decal Grav R1. And then we can turn off that anchor point layer, or the visibility of it at least. And then in here, let's set the color to white and turn everything but the color information off. And then we're going to add a black layer. So a black layer mask. So let's add on add black mask, and then add a fill layer in here. And then in the fill layer, when you click on grayscale, you can go to anchor points, and then you can select the Decal Grav R1 anchor. And once we do that, it will use the painted information from this layer as the black and white information in the mask that we just painted. So if we now switch to our mask by pressing C on the keyboard, you can see that we have a perfect black and white mask in the area where the decal has been painted. And now we are actually able to modify the look of this. So if I now go in and change the color, you can see everything updates. And I can also go in and add height information or roughness information, or change the metalness if I wanted to. So that's the way that we're going to work with decals that only have black and white information. You're going to need an anchor point layer and then a new layer on top that contains a black and white mask that references that anchor point. If you want to, you can also group these two things in a new folder. So let's select these two layers, drag them in, and then call it decal, or call it decals grav R1. And now this is a little bit cleaner because both of these layers are in the same folder group. So now that we have the decals applied, let's play with the look a little bit. First, we're going to set the color to black and change the blending mode to soft light, and maybe set this to somewhere around 35. And then let's also play with the roughness and set that to somewhere around 0.5. And I also want to give it a bit of height. So let's try 0.01. And now you can see it's starting to look like it's elevated from the base surface a little bit, but it might be a little strong. So let's go with the 0.05. And now we're still getting a bit of a bubble, but it's not as strong. And we can always tweak the look later on. One thing that we need to do is make sure that the scratches actually affect the decals as well. But that's a pass that we're going to do all the way at the end and not right now. So I'm just going to leave it at that, I think. Let's see what multiply would look like. Maybe try 0.55 for roughness so that it's a bit more visible. And always check, once you do adjustments, check on the final version of the mesh, kind of like zoom in and out, get a feel for how busy the read gets from a distance when you change attributes. And yeah, this kind of stuff, you wouldn't want it to be like super white and get like all noisy from a distance. It's better if it's a bit more subtle. Anyway, that's the first decal, and then let's keep going with the next one. Let's add another decal. So I'm going to add another folder in here. And then I'm going to bring in some new decals. I'm going to bring in the warning R1 color decal. If you did purchase the decal packs, I've changed the names in here, so you won't find them under the same name. So just go by the design if you want to use the same one. So let's drag and drop the color in alpha into Substance Painter, and switch the alpha to alpha and color to texture, and then select current session. And we could do this the same way as we did before if we wanted to. So we can add a paint layer, and then in the paint layer we can drag the alpha into the alpha slot, turn off everything but color, and then turn the color into the color slot. And then with Control right mouse button, I can make this bigger and then use the left mouse button to paste this on there. And this works perfectly fine, as you can see. But there are a few issues with projection. So for example, if I place it here, you can see that it's a little distorted. And if you want to get around that, you can do that in the brush settings. So you can go all the way down here and change the alignment from tangent wrap to camera. And now it's like perfectly aligned to the camera. So you get less distortion, but there still is distortion, as you can see. Like this is still not following the exact line down here. And another way to get around that is to switch from perspective view to orthographic view. So we're going to press F6 on the keyboard, and now you are in orthographic view. And now when you project stuff, you can see that things get like really, really precise, and you can really line up stuff much better. And if you want to, you can go that route and you know, just do it with that layer and project it on there. But I want to show you a third way on how to do it. So let me actually undo and delete that layer. And then I'm going to go into texture, set settings, and we are going to introduce a new channel in here. So click on plus and go to user 0 and call that decal alpha, so D alpha, and then set that to linear 8. And now you can see that if we make a new layer, and this time we're going to choose a fill layer, we have this new material option down here called D alpha, which is the one that I've just created. So what we're going to do here is we're going to turn everything off in the fill layer but the color and the decal alpha. And then I'm going to drag the color into the base color and the decal alpha into the decal alpha. And right now it's filling everything on my mesh with that material. And that was to be expected. But with the new version of Substance Painter, you can use planar projection with fill layers. So in the fill options, switch it from UV projection to planar projection. And now you have this box that you can move around in your scene. And you can influence the box by pressing W, E, or R on the keyboard. W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. So first we're going to go into scale mode and really scale this down. And then go to move mode and move this in an area where it intersects with your mesh. And now you can see we are projecting the decal onto the geometry in this area, which is great. But you can see that alpha is not being taken into account, and that's why we need this new, or that's what we need this new channel for. So we're going to work with another anchor point again. So first we're going to call this decals, or decal warning 01 anchor. And then we're going to right mouse button and then add anchor point. And there we go. And then in the same layer, we're going to add a black mask this time. And then we're going to add a fill. And in the fill layer, we're going to go to anchor points and choose the decal warning 01 anchor. And instead of referencing the base color channel, which is the color information, we're going to reference the decal alpha channel, which is our alpha. And now you can see this is getting masked out nicely by our decal alpha texture that we're using. Let's switch back to regular perspective mode by pressing F5 on the keyboard. And then we can start rotating this decal and kind of like align it with the surface a little bit better. And then we're just gonna position it in the right spot where we want it. And now we can really nicely align it, and we're not limited to the brush tools with how we place it. And we can also scale it to get rid of a little bit of distortion. And let's just find a spot that works well for us. Maybe somewhere around here. And then you can see we're getting all kinds of weird projection artifacts. And it's usually because this box is just too big and it's intersecting with too much stuff. Now, unfortunately, I need it to be a certain size, but that's fine. We can ignore the artifacts for now and just focus on positioning this decal first. So let's find a spot. Maybe here is good. Let's take a look at the combined mesh, what this looks like. And you know, you can always like move it around on the original mesh and kind of see what that gives you. Scale it down a little bit. And once we have a spot that we're happy with, yeah, you know, maybe something like this is good. We can see if we want to figure out the issue with the projection. But let me actually play around with it a little bit more. The cool thing about positioning it using the fill layer is that you have your 3D projection settings down here. So you can type in values as well. So for example, if you want to rotate it a certain angle, you can just go in here and use, let's say, -22.5. And now it's perfectly aligned to like the center of this face. Or you can use the slider to rotate it, and then you can also offset it using numeric inputs. And that's something that some of the other projection methods don't give you, like you don't have any precise control over it. So let's say we're pretty happy with where it's positioned. Then we can move on to figuring out how we fix the projection issues. So let's start figuring out where this decal is being drawn. So I only want it to be drawn here. So if I go into my mask and switch this to mask over here, you can see we're getting all kinds of color information in areas where we don't want to have it. So we can just paint this out actually. So we're going to right click and click on Add Paint. And we're going to call that one Decal Mask. And then all we need to do is switch to Polygon Fill mode and use a black foreground color. And then we're just going to fill the areas where we don't want the decal to be drawn with black. And then if I press M and switch back to paint mode, you can see the decal is now only being drawn here and not in any of the other areas anymore, which is exactly what I want. So let's go back to the original layer first. And let's also turn on roughness to give it some roughness information and set this to 0.5. And we're also going to add some height information, and we're going to make it stick out. So let's try 0.01. And here you can see we now have a sticker that sticks out from the top of the surface. Now, the roughness we probably need to tweak a little bit, but let's go step by step. The first thing that I don't like is that the sticker is inheriting the surface grain from the plastic, and it should be perfectly flat. It shouldn't have any of that grain on there. And to fix that, we're going to go into the height channel, and we're going to switch this from linear dodge to normal. Now, when I do it here, you can see nothing happen, nothing changes, and that's because the top decals layer is still set to linear dodge for the height channel. But if I go in here and set this to normal as well, you can see that the sticker is now perfectly flat, and the height information is just being added on top of what's already there. So let's tweak this a little bit. Let's bring the intensity down, something like this. And then let's take a look at the roughness as well. It should still have some reflectivity, I feel like. And let's just cycle through the different channels. So this is looking good. But I want a bit of roughness on the sticker. So what we can do is we can just add a fill and add the fill on the layer itself, not on the mask. So let's add fill. And then for the fill layer, we're only going to turn on roughness. And let's just look for a grunge map. We can go to grunges if we want, and maybe try grunge dirt thin or something. And now you can see we have some roughness on top of here. And maybe just set this to multiply. And we can mess with the balance. And also crank up the tiling, something like 4. And then let's bring the multiplication intensity down to, okay, we are in the height channel right now, which is why this is not doing anything for us. So here we can set it to normal 100 if we want to, because the height is not activated, it doesn't do anything. But if we switch this to roughness and then switch it to multiply, now you can see it's doing something. And then we can just bring this back down to 50. And now we're getting a bit of roughness breakup, which is all that I was looking for. Let's go back to 4 and play with the balance some more. This can be pretty subtle. It doesn't need to be a lot. Maybe try a different scale. Play with the balance again. And let's just leave it at that. You can always tweak these values if you want. So next what we can do is add a little bit of breakup to the sticker so that it's not a perfect sticker, but it actually has a bit of grunge to it. So let's go into the mask again and then add another paint layer. And right click on the mask and click on add paint. And this time we're gonna set this to subtract. And then we're gonna go to brush mode and just look for our brush library. So in the alphas, you can see we have different brushes here. So maybe let's select a brush like this. So double click on it. And then we can zoom in UV mode onto our sticker. And if we set the foreground color to black, which it is right now, so with X you can cycle, you can subtract from your mask. So actually, I guess I need to set it to white. So if I just double click here, you can see we're adding a bit of damage to the sticker, which gives it a bit more character. And then you can just select a bunch of different brushes and go in and, mess with the outline a little bit. If you want to rotate the brush, Control left mouse button and move the mouse up and down to rotate it. And that way you can kind of, add a bit more, or like rotate your brush and add a bit more detail in localized areas. If you hold down Alt and left mouse button up and down, you can rotate the canvas, which is essentially the same thing. But I like rotating the brush better. So let's just subtly go in here and just rough this up a little bit. And maybe try another alpha. Maybe something like this. And be careful not to overdo it with just like with everything before. Subtlety is really what you're looking for. You don't want a bunch of noise everywhere. That's not the point. It's just creating these like irregularities that you might find on a real object. And unless it's been like super worn, you probably won't have a ton of break up here. But anyway, I think this is good, but I'm noticing that the intensity of the height is too high. So let me go back and kind of like reduce it a little bit to like 0.005. And I also don't like the scale of the roughness here, the roughness breakup. So let me actually increase that again. And play with the balance again. And really make it a bit more subtle. Yeah, that's good. So this is looking good. It's getting better and better. So let's just keep going. So the last thing I want to do to this is I want to add an effect to the sticker so that it looks like it's kind of peeling off on the corners a little bit and it bends outward a little bit. So to do that, I need to have a mask or an anchor point of this outline that I've just created. So let's go into the mask and then add a new anchor point on top of this. Now just add anchor point, and then it's going to take everything below and then make a new anchor point from it. And we're going to call that decal warning 01 anchor, or let's call it sticker anchor. And if we go into the mask channel, this is the anchor point that we have created. And then we can add a new fill layer on top. And I just want the height information. And let's crank this up a little bit and then add a black mask and then add a fill layer here. And then we're going to go to anchor points and select the sticker anchor. And now you can see I can add to this here with the mask that we've just created. And that's great. So the first thing we're going to do is let's add a blur to this. So right mouse button, add filter, and then select blur. And then maybe tone this down to 0.25. And you can see we're now getting this look of the sticker peeling off on the sides. Maybe try 0.4. It's a little bit better. But what I don't want is, I don't want the plastic to feel like it's dented. I only want the sticker to have that feel. So we're going to add another fill layer. And we're going to sample the sticker anchor again. And then we're going to set this to subtract. So let me just go in here and choose subtract. But then you can see it's doing the opposite of what it's doing. It's taken away the inside and not the outside. So in the levels adjustment layer, I can just click on invert. And now it's taken away, it's reversing the effect. So we're getting exactly what I want. And then you can also play with the intensity if you want. And one last thing that I like to do is I like to add another blur on top of that. So let's do add filter. Let's select another blur. And now we can just blur this out just a slight amount, maybe like 0.01 or probably a bit more. 0.05. No. 0.1. Probably still need a bit more. 0.2. And then in the height channel here, we can either change the intensity or we can just play with the value that we have here. So right now that's obviously a little bit too much. So let's try just a slight, just a slight effect, because I only want it to feel like it's peeling, kind of like on the corners here, and give it a bit of variety. And I think that's feeling pretty good to me. So, broken up the sticker nicely. And it doesn't feel like it's just slapped on, like it actually has a bit of character to it right now, which I like. So if you want to, you can obviously spend a bunch more time on this and really go into the mask and make sure it's exactly what you want. But for now, I'm just gonna leave it here. So let's clean up the layers that we've created here a little bit. We can call that one decal peel. And this one is just decal warning 01. And let's drag these both into our folder here and call that decal warning 01. So now we have this one and the graph decal, which is the decal here. So let's keep going and let me show you some more ways of adding decals to your mesh. First, we're going to add a new folder and we're going to call that decal legs, and then drag that into the decals folder by left clicking and dragging. And then we're going to make a new fill layer this time and also call that one decal legs, and then left click and drag it into the decal legs folder. And we only need color, height, and roughness. So turn off the other layers and set the base color to black for this one. And then right click on the layer and add a black mask. And now when I paint here, you can see it reveals the layer underneath. So if I change the color, it updates. So let me undo that really quick and then add a paint layer to this. So right click on the mask and then add paint. And now I can paint in the mask using different brush options. So let me bring in then some decals. I have the decal graphic 02 here, and I have a regular version and an inverted version. And I'll show you why I need two versions in a second. So left click and drag that into Substance Painter and switch that to alpha on both of them because they are black and white images, and set it to current session. And then what we're going to do is select the paint layer. And since I said I want to apply decals to the leg, what we're going to do is look at it from the side, go to my paint alpha options and drag in that alpha shape. And now I have the shape and I can left click and paint on here, which is great. If I hold down Control and move the mouse up and down, I can rotate the brush, or I can go into my brush settings and change the angle. I want 270 for it to be rotated like this. And then you can see it's still adjusting to the camera a little, to the tangent a little bit. So we're going to change the alignment from tangent to camera. And now it should be perfectly placeable on this piece of geometry. And I'm also going to go into orthographic mode by pressing F6. And then what we're going to do is we're going to line up the circle of the brush with that panel line down here. So you can see that the white and black dotted line lines up exactly with the panel line. And then I'm just going to try to center it as well so that it's in the middle here. And then I'm just going to left click to paint it on. And now let's go back to the other side. Or you know what we can actually do? We can make it a little bit bigger probably. Somewhere around here. And now you can see the bottom and the top of the circle line up with the top, with that top bevel here as well, which is kind of good, and it makes it easier to align things. So let me find a centered spot, more or less, and left click to commit. And then let's go to the other side. And if I would do it here, what would happen is the orientation of the two decals is different. So see how it doesn't line up. And that's where the inverted alpha comes in. So let's go in here and load in the new alpha. And then we need to rotate it as well. So let's control and rotate it and then type in 90. And then all we need to do is find the same spot over here as we had on the other side. So it should be roughly here. Left mouse button. And now the decal should be in the right spot on both sides. So let me zoom out and look at the extended version of it over here, and then make sure that it's looking good. And what we're looking for are any inconsistencies. If I can't tell with my eye that it's not in the same spot on both sides, then it's fine. Like sometimes if you place it wrong, it becomes obvious when these elements get repeated. But for this one, I can't tell that it's hand placed, so it's fine. If you want to be super exact, you can use the same approach like we did on this decal and just use the planar projection plane and just have one on this side and then duplicate it over and just move it on this axis. And that way it's going to be in the exact same spot. But it's more time, and it takes more time to do that. And I don't think we need to do it for this one because it's easy to place by hand. So that's it. And let's keep going with these. So next, let's just bring in some more decals. Let's bring in the arrows. So drag them both in and then set those to alpha. And set it to current session, and then make sure you click the right button, so import. And then we can just keep painting on this layer and changing up the alpha. So let's just drag the 3 arrow in here, and then let's find the leg again and find a good spot to place this decal on. And I was thinking maybe the top here is kind of like a good location. So let's control to rotate. And then we're gonna adjust the value so that it's exactly 180 degrees. And then let's scale this thing a little bit. And maybe scale it so that it traces the outline of the red here, and then left mouse button to commit. And then let's do the same thing for here, but this time we're going to use the 1 arrow decal. So let's just go to the alpha again, left click and drag, and then Control left mouse button to rotate it. And make sure you always check it's the correct angle. And then all we need to do here is position it the same way, maybe something like this. Left mouse button. And now we have these arrow decals. And then let's take a look at what this looks like over here. Yeah, that's pretty good. So let's keep going. One thing that's always good to do is to check if your decals have been projected correctly. So if you go to UV view and press C to look at mask, you want to make sure that you only have white information in these areas. Sometimes when you project stuff, it can project through other parts, and then you want to make sure to add another paint layer and paint that out if that happens. But everything worked fine so far here. So we're good to go to add more decals. So let's bring that one in, alpha and current session, and then import. And then same thing, we're going to go to the paint layer. We're going to go to our brush settings and drag the alpha in here. And let's project that one here. So let's see where this part is. Maximize this here. And then we're gonna just scale this down. And then see if we can kind of like align it here in the center. Somewhere around here. Make sure to paint with white and not with black. And then let's see what that looks like on the mesh. Might be a little big, maybe bring it down a little bit. So let's reduce the brush size. And then see if we can, kind of have to sort of eyeball it, but I'm not overly worried. Yeah, I think that's looking better. The other one was a little big. And then we can also try bring in another decal, maybe this guy here. Set this to alpha and current session, import. And then we're going to do the same thing. Go to our brush, drag it over here. And let's just place that down here. That's not looking too bad. And I'm just checking the different versions of the mesh and kind of like seeing what the decals look like from different angles. One thing that's bothering me a little bit is that the arrows are being cut off here. So if we wanted to, I guess we could paint 2 of them out so that there's only 1 arrow left. So we can go into UV view and then just select or delete the brush alpha. And then let's see, if I paint this out, I just want to see what this looks like. You got to be careful not to touch that other arrow. And then now we get something like this. And I guess that looks better here. What does it look like if I just get rid of the top one? Yeah, I kind of don't mind that. I think that's it's looking pretty good, and it's not as awkward as having this whole thing disappear when it's folded up. So maybe just go with 2. And you know, here it's nice we have these, because it's the same decal pack, we have these design elements that are like repeating, and it makes it look like it's all from the same family, which is cool. So let's keep going and add more decals, and we're going to add another one like this using this approach. So we're going to use a layer and project it onto our mesh. So let's create a fill layer, because the projection works with fill layers, and just wait for it to be created. And then turn off everything but metal, emissive, and decal alpha. And then I'm going to bring in a new texture, and I'm going to use Danger02 color and alpha. So let's take both of them and drag them in here. And then the alpha is alpha, the texture or the color is texture, and set it to current session. And then let's do our adjustments on the fill layer. Let's set this to planar projection. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drag the base color into the base color, and we're going to drag the decal alpha into the decal alpha. And then we're going to add a anchor point. So let me actually move this up a little bit and then add anchor point. And first we're going to call that one decal Danger02. And then I'm going to copy this and paste it and call that anchor. And then we're going to add a black mask, and we're going to add a fill layer. And in here, we're going to sample the decal Danger02 anchor, but we're not going to sample the base color channel. We're going to sample the decal alpha channel. And now it should be masked out correctly. So select the base layer and position this thing on the leg and scale it down a bit. And move it towards the leg. This gets a little bit tedious, but luckily Substance Painter is actually pretty good with focusing on things. And if you remember from before, we also need to set the UV wrap to none so that it only gets projected once. And then let's just align this and kind of like position it here. And then also make this really, really thin. Move it out, because we only wanted to project on this face and not anywhere on the inside. And that's great. So we are getting the color information from the color that we project on it. And then we can turn on height and roughness if we want to get some height and roughness. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate the whole layer. So Control D. And then we're going to call that decal Danger02. Location 2 if you want, or call it however you want to call it, honestly. And then we're just moving this other one over, and now we need to rotate it 180 degrees. So we can just go into our layer, and under the 3D projection settings, we can just rotate that 180 degrees. And this is cool because now this is in the exact same spot as on the other side, but just slightly rotated. And if we go back to our combined version of the mesh over here, you can see that we have these two guys in the right spot now. So let me actually make them a little bit smaller. I should have checked beforehand. So maybe I'm gonna delete the copy, and with the first one selected, we can go over here and kind of like look what it looks like in the combined version. And let's mess with the scale. Let's turn on lock so that it scales it on all 3 axes. So let's try something like 0.003. Well, let's undo that and turn on this again. One zero too much, I guess. let's go with 2.9. Move this up just a tad. Gotta be careful with these values. I keep messing them up right now. Maybe something like this. And yeah, this is looking better because now in the folded mode, it's not cutting off that decal. It looked, I mean, it wasn't looking bad, but it was bothering me a little bit. So let me go back over here, zoom back in, and then same as before, Control D to duplicate. Make sure that you have the layer selected. Sometimes it doesn't work and you have to do copy and paste, which is fine too. So let's just call that log02. And well, before we do that, I have to scale it back down again. I messed that up when I changed the lock on the scale. So this is good now. It's not projecting on anything else it's not supposed to. So Control D. And then just move that over and rotate 180 degrees and then find the sweet spot here. And there we go. Got this going. And yeah, that's looking pretty decent. We're going to tweak all the height values and the roughness and all that stuff later. For now, I just want to place the decals and have them in place. So let's keep going and let's maybe add a logo for the device down here. So let me bring in the logo, which is this, drag that in, switch that to alpha and current session, import. And we can keep painting on that decal legs layer in the paint layer. So go to the brush settings and just drag the decal logo in there. And then find the spot where I want to paint it on, which is over here. And let's set the alignment to camera. Switch to orthographic view. And we can rotate this 90 degrees. Make sure white is your foreground color. And then paint it somewhere down here. I only want it on one side so that it doesn't repeat everywhere. And also, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this or not later on, but I just wanted to see what it looks like and have it positioned there for now. Let's do more decals, and I'm going to do the QR code one next. So let's drag them in. The alpha needs to be alpha, the texture needs to be texture, and I'm going to import to current session. And this one is going to be the same as this smaller one, this guy here. So I'm going to take the decal danger 021 and Control D to duplicate, move this up and call that QR code or 1. And then in here, we're going to bring in the correct color information. And we're going to drag the decal alpha in here as well. And then I should be able to move this around, rotate that over. So go to our 3D projection settings, set this to 90, move it over, move it up, scale it up a little bit. And there we go. Here's the new decal. And then we can scale this up. and position it kind of like in the center here. Let's rotate the light. Make sure we get the right spot. Maybe somewhere here. Let's see what that looks like. I wonder if we should just move this up. But I actually think it's better down here. Maybe reduce the scale a little bit. Try 0.5 on both of these. That way it's not super intense for the most part. But yeah, I'm liking this. I think I'm gonna keep it here. So next, let's create some arrow decals. I already brought in the arrow alpha and the arrow color. So I just left clicked and dragged them in and then brought in the alpha as an alpha and the color as a texture. And then I'm gonna add a paint layer this time and drag this out of the group. Call that one decal arrows. And then put that in a group as well. And the group is called decal arrows as well. And then on this one, we're going to do it the same way as we did originally. So we're going to go in and in the brush settings, bring in the alpha for the brush alpha. And we're going to turn off everything but color. And we can bring in the base color into the base color slot. And if we want to, we can also bring in the decal alpha into the decal alpha, just to have it in there. And then if I start painting in an area where I can actually paint, so basically over here, I can start painting these decals onto my mesh, which is great. And I think the first section I want to start out with is down here. So first we're going to try to find the right size, maybe try 1.25. And I think overall that's probably a good size for this type of decal. Maybe 1.3, just slightly bigger. But I want to make sure that these are consistent everywhere. And I want to place these on the leg as well. So I want to place them in spots like here. So you want to make sure you don't make them too big. So I guess yeah, let's go back down to 1.25 just for the sake of it. Just leaves a bit more breathing room. Okay, so now that we have chosen a size, let's start down here. And what we can do is, first of all, let's rotate the alpha. So Control left mouse button and kind of rotate it so it's like this. And then what we want to find out is the actual rotation value. So let's go into the brush and yeah, we'll set this to 135. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our upper circle hits that bevel line and the left circle hits the bevel line here in the corner. And then we're going to just project it on here. And then we're going to go around to the next spot. Do the same thing over here. And project it on here. Go around. Do the same thing over here and project it on here. And now we need to rotate. So Control left mouse button and 225. And one more time, we're just going to go through and line it up with the bevels. And then let's see how that feels like on the final mesh. Seems pretty consistent to me, I gotta say. So yeah, nice. So I want to keep going with the arrow decals, and I'm gonna start looking at these guys here. So first, let's set the angle to 90. And then the first one we're going to place here. So kind of like in the center of this. And we can also go to orthographic projection mode if you're not in it already. And yeah, let's just place one here. And then let's try to find the center of this and place one here as well. And then let's flip to the other side. Rotate the light and flip this decal, and then we're gonna try to position it here and here as well. And then what we're gonna do is try to do the same thing over here so that this stuff lines up with one another. So we want to have this over here and try to like find the right position for it. So maybe here and here. And then let's look at this over here, how accurate that was. And you can see not overly accurate, so let's try to eyeball this some more. We can also press Tab to go into full screen. If you wanted to, you can do it with planes as well, and that's easier to line up then, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. I don't want to have to go through setting up the planes. So this seems to be okay. And then we got to do it for the other side as well, obviously. Let's rotate. Yeah, this doesn't seem too bad. So like I was saying, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it should somewhat line up, especially when this thing is closed. Otherwise, it's just going to look awkward. There we go. So let's keep going. I want some here as well. So let's set the angle to 0 and then set the alignment to camera for this one. And then we're just going to go here and try to somewhat then center that. And do the same thing over here. Am I okay with that? I think that's fine. And Could also do it below if we wanted to. Don't scale your object like I just did, or your brush. So set it back to 1.25. Set the flow to 100. And then we are going to switch the angle to 180. Just place this here. Might be a little much. I might go back in and actually get rid of one of them, but for now I'm just going to leave it just to see what that feels like in the renders later on. Also, maybe we'll do some on the pipes down here. I'm just trying to look for other spots where it would make sense to kind of like have these things. I guess we could do a whole barrage here. See what that would look like. Guess we can give this a try. Set this back to tangent wrap and then rotate this 45 or 235. And then let's see, find that angle. Okay, I can't paint on here. So let's try this. And this. And this. And this. Keep scaling it, so let me undo that. And then 125. Actually, 135 is the correct angle. I guess let's try this. See if I like that. Yeah, maybe just leave it for now. You know, sometimes you tend to add too much in the beginning and kind of like go overboard. And then when we take a look at the final renders, I might go back in and remove some of them because they can get a little bit noisy, especially from a distance. There's too many of them, but I do kind of like that look that they add. So for now, I think I'm just gonna leave them in there. Let's keep going. Let's keep adding more of these guys. So let's try something here. So let's go to our projection settings and set this to camera. And let's try to find a angle that works here. So we got 35. And place that here. Well, I can't paint on this guy. So one over here. Try 3 or 5. $3.15. Getting a bit of distortion, but I think that's okay. And I think of the back side, we're going to have some problems to paint it in orthographic mode. So you know what, maybe undo that and let's just try doing it in UV mode. That should be possible. So let's see where this guy is at. Actually, let's redo add stroke. And now we know, okay, here's where we got to add them. And here it's actually easier, or most likely easier. So 3.15. Let's set this to UV. See what that looks like. Okay, it's giving us too much distortion. So what we're going to do is we're going to set it to tangent wrap, and then we're just going to do it in 3D in perspective view, which is not ideal, but I think we can get it to work. So let's try here, and then switch this to 35. Try here. Try here. And try here. That looks all right to me. So let's just keep going with the arrows. And let's add a few more, maybe on the wheel over here. So I think we can do one. Let's switch back to perspective mode first, because I'm having a hard time focusing on this spot otherwise. So here we go. Let's do one here in the center, and do one on the back side as well. And I'm wondering if there's any benefit of having some of them on here. But I think I'm gonna leave it as is for now. So there we go. Let's add some more decals. Let's make a new folder just like we did before, and then drag in some of these other decals. Let's try Danger 04. Or actually, let's try Danger 03 first. So let's drag that in there and set that to alpha and then current session. And let's call that decal danger 03. And since this is just one color, what we can do is we can just use a fill layer. So let's drag that in there, call that one decal danger 03. And let's add a black mask. And then we can do a paint layer in here. And on the paint layer, just like before, we're going to add the alpha. And now we should be able to paint on here. And I'm thinking maybe this one goes here. And maybe we'll do it in UV view. So let's press F3 on the keyboard. Let's see where this area is first. Okay, there we go. So this one is going to be tricky to paint simply because of the way that the UVs are laid out. So let's do it in the viewport. Let's find a good area somewhere here in the middle. And then yeah, just project that on there. And then let's do the same in the back. Project it on there. And then let's see what that looks like on the mesh. Yeah, I think that's kind of cool. So first, let's just change the base color. Maybe we can use that same color that we're using on this guy here. So something like this to be in line with everything. And then we don't need metalness, normal, emissive, or alpha. So for now, what we're going to do is let's just decrease the height. Let's do 0.001, and let's set this to soft light for the base color. Or let's just try. Yeah, let's just try soft light and just bring this down. Or we're gonna just leave it here. And I'm not sure if I want to affect the metalness or not, because in theory, if it's a sticker, it's not going to be metal. So what we can do is we can turn on metallic and just turn it off for this section, which I've just done. And instead play with the roughness a little bit. Maybe something like this. Well, let's leave that at 0.5, and then later on I'll get back to it and actually make the proper adjustments. Right now I just want the decal placement, and then we can worry about material attributes later. It's going to be the same as on this one, just adding new fill layers with texture so that we get a bit of a breakup. So there we go. Let's continue with the next decal. And at this point, it's just more of the same. So making a new folder, decal danger 04, and a new paint layer, not a fill layer in there. Drag it in there, and then call that one decal danger 04 anchor. And just like before, we can go into the paint layer, and I brought in these two new textures. So I've brought in decal danger 04 alpha and color, just like I did with the other ones, brought in the alpha as alpha and the color as a texture. And then I'm going to drag the alpha into the alpha slot, turn off height, roughness, metalness, and normal, and drag the color into the color slot. And then we're going to turn on decal alpha and drag the decal alpha in here. And then let's project that on here. So let's zoom in, go to orthographic view mode, and then in the brush settings, also set this to camera. And then we can literally just make it a circle and kind of like align it with the red circle here. There we go. I might actually just position it a little bit higher. I think it lines up with these indents a little bit better this way. And there we go. So we have the anchor. And then we can just make a new fill layer and call that decal danger 04 rough height, and turn off everything else. And then we can add a black mask, add a fill, and then we're going to select a newly created anchor, decal danger 04 anchor. So let's see. Oh, I haven't created the anchor point yet, so let's create it. And then I can go in here and select it. There we go. And then switch it to decal alpha channel. And now it's using the right slot. And then I can just quickly dial this in to something I might like more and adjust the roughness. And we're going to do the final material adjustments later. I just want to get the decal positioning done, like I was saying before. So there we go. Let's keep going. Let's do another decal, maybe on the side here. So let's bring in the explosive decal alphas. So drag them in, alpha and texture and current session. There we go. And then we're going to make a new group. What's the file name of this again? Explosive 02. And then paint layer. Drag that in here, copy, paste. And you guessed it, we're dragging in the alpha. And we're dragging in the base color and then dragging in the alpha again. And then we can start painting, which is great. And this one is small enough, I think, where the distortion doesn't really make or becomes a problem. We can literally just paint it on from the side. So this seems to be working reasonably well in orthographic viewport mode. Trying to find a spot where nothing else is in front of it. Maybe this was actually a good position. Let's see if we can switch it to tangent wrap, if that makes much of a difference. Guess camera is better here. So let's just place that down here in the corner. See what that looks like. That feels pretty good to me, the location here. And then let's copy this. Actually, let's just rename that anchor right away. And then right mouse button, add anchor point. And then we can add a new fill layer. Copy, paste the name. And then height rough. And then we're going to add a black mask, add a fill, select the explosive 02 anchor point, set it to decal alpha, and then we can mess with the height and the roughness if we want to. And again, just like before, let's dial this in really quickly. Doesn't need to be perfect. And we'll do final material tweaks later. So there we go. So let's just keep adding more decals. I want to add something up here and down here. And I'm going to do it on the decal leg layer. I might have to move it out of the group, but this one kind of like has a lot of the black and white decals on it. So I'm going to go into that layer, and we can go into the paint layer and then use this decal here that we already imported earlier. And let's look at this from the top and rotate it so that it's facing the right orientation. And then see if we can find the center of this by lining it up like this. And then Control right mouse button. And then let go of Control, let go of right mouse button, make sure foreground color is white, and left mouse button to paint. And let's try the bottom here as well. Find a light position where we can see this indent a bit better so that we can center it on it. And maybe make it smaller, left mouse button. And I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of this down here. Well, one thing we need to change, I guess, is make sure the orientation matches at least. So let's undo and then rotate this. And set the angle to 180. Can also set this to camera. Press tab to go to full screen so that we can see this bevel a bit better. Line this up again. And then scale it down. Let's leave it in there for now. I'm not sure if I'm gonna commit to it yet, but we will see. And then I also want to add some more of these Foxtecc decals. So remember we added one down here, and I also want to add one kind of like up here. So let's turn off the angle, set this to 0, and I basically want to place it up here, which shows up here in the texture. So let's actually place this in the UV. So rotate the canvas with Alt and left mouse button, and then hold down Shift to snap in 90-degree increments. And then we need to compensate for it in the brush. So 270 here, and then make it a bit bigger. And now if I project this, you can see this is giving me distortion, and I need to choose a different projection mode here. I need to set this to UV instead of camera. And now it's gonna project it onto the UVs. And there we go. This is essentially perfect. And one thing I also want to do is kind of like, for consistency's sake, have this be the same size as this down here. So if we go back down to the leg, let's find where that is. Okay, it's down here. You can see that they're pretty much the same size. But what I'm going to do is, so the size is 11.68, so I'm going to copy this value really quick. And then really quickly in the brush, we're going to replace the logo and then paint over this with black. And then we're going to switch foreground color again, do this. And now let's try pasting this. And now these are the same size, and that's kind of consistent because if this is a sticker, the way that this would be manufactured is they would probably just make one size of the sticker and you would just paste it onto the mesh again, and you wouldn't have like different sizes. So it's just a minor detail, but sometimes that kind of stuff can seem inconsistent when you look at it, but you don't actually know why that is. And the reasoning behind it is because, you know, in real life, when they make stickers, it's usually one size. And if you have different sizes on the mesh in different positions, then sometimes it can be weird. Like here and here, I think it's an exception because they could just make a bigger sticker. But for things like that, I don't think they would make different ones. So remember this value, 11.68. Like if we want to make more of these, we should probably use the same value. So let's just keep that in mind. Let's keep going and add a decal to the grenade, maybe one down here. And we can just duplicate the leg decal that we've used before, specifically the Danger 02 one, which is using the projection, because this one is going to use projection as well. So let's Control D to duplicate that and call that one decal grenade 01 for now. And let's just drag this out of here all the way to the top. Make a new group, decals grenade, and then let's drag that in here. And let's also move this over and position it over here. And let's go a bit closer. And then we're going to go to the 3D projection settings and rotate this 90 degrees. And then bring that closer. Bring that over. And maybe we need to rotate it -90. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to move this down, move this forward, backward, I guess. Scale it up. And let's bring in the new decal that we want to use. Caution 01, alpha and color. Let's drag it in. Just like before, alpha turns to alpha, color to texture. And then let's go to our settings. Color and decal alpha. Let's also go back to perspective mode. It's going to be a bit easier to navigate that. And here we are, and now we can just play with the positioning. We should probably play with the scale a little bit, just because it gets scaled based on the way that it's being projected. And we could rotate it as well, but then you can see we're getting this weird, like it gets distorted a little bit. And I guess that's true in like both ways. Let me just see what I can do here. It's becoming more and more, or less and less responsive. So let's try maybe something like this, and then scale this up. And yeah, I don't want to make it super big, because then the projection issues become more and more apparent. So maybe this is kind of a good position for this. And then let's duplicate this, Control D. And just move this back. Change the rotation, move this in. This is looking good. And let's check the texture, see if there's any errors we're getting in projecting this on. And this is actually looking good. It's not bleeding out in other areas, which I like. And then, yeah, this is looking pretty decent. So we have decal Danger 02 anchor. So let's just rename this lock 01. Copy, paste, and then this should have automatically updated, which it did. And then we can just do a fill on top if we wanted to. Just for rough as well as height. I mean, for this one, we could also do it in a layer if we wanted to. But let's just set it up like this for now. And bring in decal grenade lock01 and decal grenade lock02. Sorry, we need 2 fill layers. So we got lock01 and then set this to decal alpha, lock02, set this to decal alpha, and then we can just play with the height here. So yeah, there we go. We've got that positioned here nicely as well. So I'm not a big fan of everything being white here. So I went ahead and made a quick color variation of the color map in Photoshop and tinted the left part with that reddish color that we have. So let me just bring this in, set this to texture, current session, and then we're gonna just replace it on our base layer. So we're gonna just drag and drop the color in here and drag and drop the color onto the backside. And now we have a bit of breakup, which to me just works a little bit better. So let's just break this up a little bit more. So let's stay on this layer here. And what we're going to do, just like on the other sticker, we're going to add a fill layer. Sorry, not a fill layer, but a paint layer. And then we're going to set that to subtract. And then if we paint with white, it should subtract from the layer, and it does, as you can see. So we want to use a more interesting brush. So let's just drag that one in here, scale it up, and then maybe rotate it a bit. And then we can kind of start subtracting. And let's also hide this layer on top here so that we can kind of see what's going on when we do these changes. And I just want like a little bit of subtlety just on the corners, just like we did on the other sticker. And that looks good to me. And then we're going to add a anchor point. So let's see what we called the original one. Let's go to that layer, decal grenade 01 lock02. So let's call that decal grenade 01 lock02 and then DMG. And then we can go into our height layer up here. And in both of these layers. So let's replace the lock02 with the damage layer so that it takes that new damage into account. And there we go. Now we have the height on the damage that we just painted in, which is what I wanted. Let's do the same treatment for the other decal on the back. So let's turn the layer back on for this. And then let's turn off the height layer just for now. It doesn't make any difference right now anyway, because I forgot to do something earlier, but I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So let's add a paint layer here. So add paint and then set this to subtract. And let's select our brush alpha again. And then we're going to do the same treatment as on the other side. Just this time, let's try to like do a bit of a different design. And remember, you have to paint with white in this case. So maybe something like this. And here, just to rough it up a little bit. And then we're going to add a new anchor point. Call that one _DMG. And then let's go into our height layer. And we need to switch the lock1 to the DMG layer as well. So lock1 DMG, the one we've just created. And you can see right now it's not doing anything. It only is doing anything if I turn off the top layer. And the reason for that is I have two fill layers and they both have the normal blending mode, which means this fill layer is basically just a black and white image. So it's going to fill everything with black, but this white area that we've painted out. And then the other layer on top is just another fill layer that is only white in this area. So it's overriding the stuff that's going on over here. So on the top layer, if we switch the blending mode to screen, we will get both layers coming through. And then if I switch to my regular material mode, you can see that I now have the bump effect that I was looking for. And if you are so inclined, you can go through and do the same treatment that we did here with the beveled edges on that sticker. But I think it's so small that I'm not going to do it. And I've already recorded it before, so if you want to do it, feel free to do so. So I want to show you a few more tricks how you can align decals a little bit better. And to do that, let's go to the arrow folder. We close the other folders and then set up our brush real quick, just like we did before. Alpha, color, alpha. And now I can paint on this. And remember, the size that we used for this was 1.25. And let's see, for the alignment, we can just do camera here. And I want to center these in the center of this piece up here, but I don't know where the center is. And one quick and easy trick is go to the viewport settings over here. So switch to the viewport settings and then turn on mesh wireframe and bring down the opacity. And now if I close this, you can see I have a polygon line right here in the middle of this element that allows me to align my decal with it. So let's switch to orthographic view to make it even easier. And then I'm just gonna project it here, aligning it in the center. And then let's go in and change the rotation. You can also obviously drag these panels on a second monitor to make it a bit easier. But for recording, that's obviously not ideal. So right now the space is a little bit cramped. So let's quickly just paste these in. And there we go. And then if I go back to the viewport settings and turn off the mesh wireframe, you can see that that worked pretty well. Everything's nicely aligned and it's right in the center. So that's another trick to do that. One of the other things I want to do is replace this logo here. I think it's actually quite boring, and I designed a new font for it, or used a different one, the same from my military radio tutorial. So let me go in here. This should be in the decal legs folder and in the decal legs layer. So that's correct. So I'm going to go onto that paint layer here, and let's just go into UV view first. I'm going to find the area where the stuff is applied, use the eraser and just paint this out. So I think it was here as well as somewhere down here. Yep, there we go. But before I paint out this, I want to see what size that was. So actually, let's not do this in the eraser, do it in the paintbrush. And then let me just rotate that. 270 and then scale it up. Maybe 15 is a good value. And then I'm going to use the eraser to paint this out. And then I'm going to use my stamp brush, not the stamp brush, but the regular brush, and change the colors or change the lighting so that I can see the bevels here and so that I can center it. And then I'm going to paint that with white. And then let's go into 3D view. And yeah, that's looking better. And then I want to do the same thing for the original location here. I must have undone one layer too far. So let's paint this out again with the eraser. And then we're just going to stamp this in. And yeah. Let's undo and maybe bring it down just a tad. And then I also want to stamp the logo kind of like here on the inside, just to make these a bit more interesting. And we can do all of that on the UVs. So let's set the alignment to UVs. And let's find the position of these guys. So, yep, there's one. And then here's the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to kind of like align the text with these 4 details here. Try to center it out. So 1. And then let's rotate this again to 0. 2. And 3. And as you can see, that logo now is here. And it seems to be aligned reasonably well. And we also have it here, as well as up here. So there we go. So let's do a cleanup pass on the decals and finalize everything. So the first thing that I want to do is fix one of the issues that we're having right now. So you can see that the scratches in the plastic right now, they don't get reflected in the decals. So it looks like they have been painted over, and that's not the look that I want. So we're going to go to our plastic, and then in the plastic group, we're going to find the scratches layer. And in that layer, in the mask, we're going to add a new anchor point, and we're going to call that plastic scratches mask. And then we're going to do the same thing for the metal. Find the scratches layer, and then we're going to add a anchor point and call that metal scratches mask. And let's see, do we have any other ones here? No, that's looking good. And then let's go back to the decals layer, and let's actually add a white mask here. And then we're going to add a fill in the mask, and then we're going to select the the plastic scratches mask. And let's set this to subtract. And now you can see it's taking the scratches away from all of the decals as well, which is exactly what I wanted. And then we need another fill. Set this to subtract as well. And this one is for the metal. So like right now you can see we're losing a lot of the opacity, but I want this to happen on the metal as well. So let's go to anchor points and select metal scratches mask. And if we switch to the mask channel, you can see that we have a black and white mask that just has the scratches from our material in here, and it's taken away from the decals layer, which is exactly what I want. So let's do a cleanup and a consistency pass on the decals and start with the grenade layer. The grenade layer is this one here. So what we want to do in the rough and height, right now this is controlling the roughness. And I want to add a bit of breakup, which is easy to do. All you have to do is right click on the layer, not on the mask, and then click on add fill. And then we're going to turn everything off but roughness. And then we're going to bring in the grunge dirt thin texture map that we've used on the other sticker as well. And you can see that there's a UV seam here. So if we crank up the tiling to like 4, it becomes really visible. So let's just set the projection to triplanar projection to get rid of that seam. And then maybe crank up the tiling some more, maybe even 10. And then we can play with the balance, maybe put it to 0.8. And then we're going to go to roughness up here instead of base color and switch the blending mode from normal to multiply, so that we are just reducing the roughness. But multiply is actually probably not the right one. So let's try subtract and play with the slider here. Yeah, let's do subtract. And then if we move this to the right position, it's going to be tricky to see on this one because of the normal angle, but there should be a bit of breakup in the roughness now. So if I set this to roughness, you can see it's not all the same color. The problem right now is that it's making it more reflective instead of less reflective, because it's adding black instead of white. So let's see what we can do. we switch this to invert and set it to multiply, actually, let's not do this. Let's undo that and just set it to linear dodge add. And now we should get less reflection in the area. Yep, here you can see we're getting some breakup. And I think for this is good. We don't need to noodle around with it too much. I just want a bit of breakup from this. And consistency, the base values should be 0.3, which is this gray value here. So fairly reflective. And let's move on to the explosive decal as well, and do a pass on that one. So that's this guy. So let's bring down the roughness to 0.3 here too. And then we're going to add a fill, just like we did before. Turn everything off but roughness, and then bring in that texture. And you can see it's adding a bit of noise, which is great. And let's just increase the tiling. Maybe 5 is good. And then increase the balance. And let's check the roughness channel. So right now it's overriding. So we need to set this to linear dodge add, just like we did before. That's actually not correct in this case. Let's try subtract, or let's try linear dodge add again and mess with the balance. And now you can see we're getting a bit of breakup, which is kind of what I wanted. Maybe bring this back down to 4 again. And then also can just bring this down to 50. I don't want it to break up as much, but you know, the goal is to just have some breakup in the specularity when we rotate the camera so that it's not the same material as the plastic underneath. What happens if we bring this to 3, 2, I think 4 was pretty good. And then it's really up to you. You can play with these values some more, and that just defines how much breakup you're going to have. But I'm going to leave it at that for this guy. And I think I'm not going to worry about the edge here. I'm not going to mess it up. So I'm just going to leave it as that. Let's keep going with the stickers. So let's go to Decal Danger 04, which I think is this guy here. Yep. So let's move over here. And same approach as before. Let's set the roughness base value to 0.3. And then we're going to add a fill. And in the fill, turn off everything but roughness. And bring in our grunge. And then set this to linear dodge add. So if we switch to roughness, you can see it's adding. And then the rest we can probably do in textured view. Crank this up to 4. And then play with the balance a bit. Maybe something like this. And again, the goal is just to get a bit of breakup. Just shouldn't be pristine. So there we go. And let's see, so this is the mask for the whole layer. If we want, we can try adding a bit of breakup to this too. So we can paint that in with a paint layer, or we can just add a white mask, and then we're going to add a fill. And maybe try this one here. What is this? Let's drag that into the fill. Grunge dirt splats, and then play with the balance. And you can see that this is modifying the overall mask. So if we go to the mask channel here, you can see that this should mask out the actual decal itself. So if I turn this off, you can see it's taken away from that whole layer. And maybe something like this is just good enough. See what happens if we change the tiling. See, I don't want to overdo it, but maybe just a little bit. Yeah, this is looking good. And then keep in mind, another thing you can always do, if this like removes too much, for example, you can add a paint layer on top, and with white, you can go in and kind of like go in these areas that are closer to the center and paint out the damage that we have here. And now it's just leaving a little bit of damage. So it's really up to you. Don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but just wanted to show you, if you want to break it up a little bit, that's another way to do it. So there we go. So let's just keep churning through all of this. Decal 03, it's the guy over here. Let's take a look. So there's a seam here underneath that we need to figure out where that's coming from later on. But let's go with the decals first. So this is just a one color decal, which is great. So what we can do here is, okay, this is on a metal material. So for the decal, I don't actually want this to be metal, which is the case right now because it's supposed to be a sticker. So let's set the roughness to 0.3. And then we're going to add a fill. And again, same as before, add our material here. And in roughness, we're going to set this to linear dodge add. And, 50% has kind of been our go-to for this layer. And then mess with the scale a little bit. And then let's see, it's giving us a bit of breakup. Let's undo that. Okay, I've just deleted the layer by accident. So let's just quickly do this again. Drag this in here, linear dodge add, 50%, and mess with the scale a little bit. And also set this to triplanar projection. Go to material mode, and yeah, here you can see what's going on. Yeah, maybe something like this is good enough. And let's see, where is danger? I guess we can call this danger 03, danger 02 and danger 03. And then let's see where decal danger 01 is. It's that guy. Okay, you can see that perfect roughness right now. So what we're going to do is same procedure. Add our roughness texture, linear dodge add, set this balance somewhere here, crank this down to 50, and mess with the scale a bit, and then play with the balance again. That's nice because it just breaks it up a little bit. And also, I guess here we could add a white mask, add a fill, bring in this grayscale here, and let's go to base color. Actually, we can stay in roughness. mess with the balance here a bit. And then we can add a levels, kind of really crank this over if we want, and then add a paint, and then go to an area where we can actually paint, which should be here. And then with white as a foreground color, we should be able to paint this out. I guess we can paint on this layer. Yep, that was correct. Well, not the layer, it's the object. But yeah, here I can now go in and bring this back and really just leave it on the corners a bit. It's kind of all I want. Just don't want to have to always manually do that. And like I was saying, this is another way of doing it if you just want a bit of breakup. And let's bring these levels down a bit. And if we wanted to paint with black to paint this out a bit more, we could. And you can see at this point, it's almost like doing it manually with the brush. So there's ups and downs to everything. So yeah, maybe something like this. And I just want to check that this was the only area. Yeah, this is the only mask for the decal. So I just wanted to make sure that I didn't mask out other things, but that's looking good. So let's minimize that. So danger 03, danger 02, danger 01, and there we go. So let's keep going. We have the decal danger. And then we have our decal arrows, which is all of these guys. So let's go in here, see what's going on. So we only have one layer here yet. So we're gonna, first of all, need to create an anchor point. And then we're gonna add a fill layer. I'm gonna call that decal arrows 8 rough. Turn off everything but height and roughness. And then we're going to add a black mask and a fill and bring in the anchor point. And now if we change the height, it only changes the height on the stuff here. But we need to change the anchor point sampling to the decal alpha so that we're getting the text as well. So there we go. And then in this case, we also want to turn on metallic and set metallic to 0, because this is on some metallic surfaces maybe as well. I'm not entirely sure, but in case it is, it will just be plastic instead of metallic. And then let's really reduce the height, maybe 0.005. 25. This needs to be pretty subtle. I want a little bit, but not a ton. And then roughness is fine at 0.3 for now. And then just like before, we're going to add a fill. Turn on only roughness. Turn on linear dodge add for the layer. And then bring in the grunge dirt thin. And set it to triplanar projection. Set the scale to 8. And then let's go to the roughness channel. And let's mess with the balance. And and maybe even crank this up to like 16 in this case. Bring this down to 50%. And here, let's see what this looks like. It's giving us some breakup. And I want a little bit less, maybe something just like this. So we have some that are pretty pristine, like this guy. But we also have some where there's definitely a bit of breakup going on. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that for the arrows. And then let's see, we've got decal legs. So that's all of this stuff. So that's actually a ton of content in here. So let's just take it one by one and get started on the QR code, which is this guy. So this has a height and a roughness that's set up correctly. And I think the scratches are also removing from the decal, which is good. It's not a ton, so if we go all the way up here, you can see it's doing something, but it's not a lot. So one thing we could try is we can add A levels on top and kind of like mess with this overall slider and maybe crank this over to like somewhere around here. And now we're getting a bit more of these scratches to come through here as well. You just want to do like a double take and see what that looks like on some of the other decals. There might be areas where you're going to have to paint it out, but I think it's a good start. So let's go to the QR code layer again. Decal legs QR code. And here, let's see. Add a fill, and again only in the roughness channel. Set this to linear dodge add, bring it down to 50% and load in our texture. Mess with the tiling a bit and adjust the balance. And maybe something like this is actually good enough for the QR code. Doesn't need much more. Okay, what do we have here? Decal Danger 02. Let's look at the mask. Where is this guy located? There we go. Let's check. Yeah, it did show up. I just missed it, I guess. Okay, so same thing here. Set the roughness to 0.3. Add a fill. Bring in our texture. Linear dodge add. Undo that. Linear dodge add. Set this to 50% and crank up the tiling and play with the balance. And this really just needs a little bit. This is so small and it's already pretty noisy, and I don't want to add a bunch of extra noise to this. So I guess this is only for this side over here. Yep. So yeah, maybe here. And then we're going to do the same for this side over here. Add a fill. Set it to linear dodge add. Set the opacity to 50%. Bring in our texture. Set the scale to 3. Play with the balance. And there we go. Just gonna leave it at that for this layer, and then we have all of these guys next. So let's keep going. We're gonna work on the decal legs next, and same process as before. We're gonna add a fill layer, turn everything off but roughness, and we're gonna load in our grunge dirt thin material. There we go. And then let's set the balance to maybe 0.39 and change the scale to 3. And it's giving us some nice breakup on these guys. But I think it's a bit too intense. So let's go to the roughness channel. And then we're going to set this to linear dodge add. And we're also going to reduce the intensity to 50%. And now we're getting a much more subtle breakup, which I think is nice. Yeah, let's just leave it at that for these guys. So let's just keep going to the next group. So we've done the decal legs. The next would be the warning, which is the big one. This one here. So I think the only thing we need to do here is to adjust the roughness to 0.3, which is what we were using on all the other decals. And this already has some breakup, which is good. So we can leave it at that. And then we're going to do the decals graph next. So here, actually, we should have modeled these ones after these ones. So let's check. This is soft light 35. Roughness is 0.55. Yeah, it's like a painted metal thing, and maybe that's not super reflective. It's less reflective than the metal. So we can leave metalness at 1, which I think right now is the case here. Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add these decals to my layer here. So let's see, decals legs, I think they are in here. Yep, that's correct. Let's see what this fill layer actually is. And then let's go to texture view. And with black, we can just paint these out. Or we can use the eraser. 1, 2, 3. And then let's go to the graph decals. And I'm going to have to add that in here because that's how I've set it up. So let me see. Yeah, this is just fully white. So let's use a brush. Drag in our logo. So let me bring in the new logo. Drag that over here. And make sure it's the right size. I think it was around 15. Yep. And then let's just set our brush. $270. One. Before we paint it in, set it to UV alignment. So 1. And then no rotation on the other guys. 2, 3. So we've got this. And then the mask automatically updates, which is great. And now all of this is just using the same material attributes. And the roughness is pretty much the same here. And honestly, I don't think it looks bad. I don't think it needs like any kind of breakup, because it'll just add a bunch more noise. So maybe for this, we'll just leave it that way. So there we go. I want to add one more decal specifically here. So let's go to the decal legs layer, go into the paint layer, and then bring in the alpha here. And I think the size for these guys was like around 6.25 or something. And let's switch to UV view. And we can also set this to UV. And then we can paint it in here with white as the foreground color. Just like this. Oh, there we go. And then we can use the eraser and just erase that upper arrow. And now we have something that's here as well. And this automatically gets our roughness treatment too. And then let's go all the way to the top layer of the decals. And then add another fill here. And let's try to look for procedurals and look for grunge. And let's see what we have here. Let's try to find a texture. That we can use to like overlay and mask out everything with. Just to get a bit of breakup. Maybe type in paint, see what that gives us. Let's try this grunge paint scratched. Drag that in here. Set this to multiply. And you can see it is doing this right now. So first we're going to do triplanar projection and then set this to something around 8. And then let's look at the legs here, because you'll see it better here. And then let's play with the balance. Bring this up just a tad. Maybe 0.85. And we can also set this to 75, just to reduce it a little bit. And you can see that breaks up all of our decals a little bit. So we want to make sure that this wasn't too intense, because it affects all of the decals. So let's just do a quick sanity check. But yeah. Okay, the paint scratched is pretty intense here. So let's just add a fill and then look for the anchor point. I think this should be decal danger. Was it 04? Yep. Maybe not. Let me check. It was pretty much somewhere at the bottom. Decal warning 01. So this would be decal warning 01 anchor. So let's add a fill. Decal warning 01 sticker anchor. Set this to overlay, or let's try normal actually. Well, let's look at the mask. So we need screen. So with screen, we're just getting rid of this noise here because I actually don't want that. On that big sticker, it just doesn't look natural. But for the other things, I think it's not bad. So yeah, you can see it's just adding a little bit of variation. Just the smallest amount of irregularities. And I think that's okay. I especially like it kind of like on these guys, because it was feeling a bit too regular. So yeah, there we go. Okay, let's keep working on this and let's work on the glow next. So to do that, what we're going to do is add a new folder set and call that glow. And then we're going to add a fill layer and drag that in there. I'm going to call that one glow base. And then we are going to add a mask with color selection, and we're going to pick the white color for our glow. And now this only shows, the material only shows up in here, basically in this area. So right now we can go into the base color of our material, change that to red, and then we turn everything off but color and emissive. And we want to set emissive to fully white. The problem is that if we color this here, it'll glow in that color. But in Blender, it's just a black and white mask. So white is basically emissive and black is not emissive. So what we're going to do for now is we can turn off the emissive channel in this and just focus on the color for a bit. So let's add another fill layer on top. And then let's make that all the way black. And then we're going to add a white mask, and then we're going to fill that. Actually, I guess what we can also do is we can just add a mask with color selection, and then we're going to select white here as well. And then let's take a look at our mask. So this is masked out. Now let's invert this actually. So we're going to add a filter and look for the invert filter. And that's inverting our mask. So now we have this black color that's being shown outside of this area. So if I turn off the invert, you can see this is black. If I turn it on, you can see everything outside of it is black. And what I want is I want to have a darker color on the outside here where it meets other materials. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another filter, and we're going to look for a blur filter. And now you can see this blurs that black mask. So if I go back into the mask channel, you can see we're blurring it, which makes it bleed into that texture. So let's just reduce this down a little bit, maybe to somewhere like here, and just take a look at the base color. And let's just duplicate this this fill layer. Let's actually call it diffuse darken, and then Control D to duplicate it. And maybe for this guy, let's use a bit of a bigger blur. And you can see now we have a bit of a gradient going on. Actually, let's just call that darken 02. And that one we can call darken 01. And then let's go back to our glow base and turn on the emissive. And then in the darken layers, we want to turn on emissive as well. And set this to black. So if we go to our emissive channel, what's happening right now is, well, we need to set this to white actually. So now the emissive gets a bit of a gradient as well, which is what I wanted. I just want, I don't want it to be the same intensity everywhere, and this is doing it, which is great. The only problem might be down here in this area, like the smaller glow sections, they don't really need as much of a blur. So let's just see how we're going to fix that. I think we can just make a group in here and call that one big glow darken. And then we're going to drag that in here. And then we're going to add a white mask, turn on material mode. Let's switch to UV view. And then let's also go to emissive here. Select the base. Actually, I'm not really sure why we're not seeing the correct emissive in here. So let me just double check. So the emissive is turned on. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. I guess we can also mask it out in 3D view. So let's just do that. So here is one section that we need to mask out from the big glow. So let's just go in here, do polygon select, set this to black, and just drag and drop on top of here and on top of here. So that should get rid of these smaller glows. So if we switch back to material view, we should definitely see that this is not darkened as much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn emissive off again here so that I just see the color. And you can see this is fully red now, which is great. And then what we can do is we can just duplicate this whole group, Control D, and we'll call that small glow darken. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a filter, and we're going to add the invert filter. And now this controls this area down here, and then we can go in here and adjust the blur values. So let's do 0.25 for the big one, and let's do 0.125 for the small one. And you can see we're having a blur, or we're having a bit of darkening going on, and the small glow doesn't affect the upper part, and the big glow doesn't affect the lower part. So let's check the emissive channel again. Looking good. And looking good. So let's leave it at that for the emissive. So now that we have the glow set up, let's do a few more tweaks on the materials in general. And I want to start on the metal material. So I want to add a bit more variation and scratches to it. So we're going to add another fill layer on top here. And then in this layer, we only need color, height, roughness, and metal. And let's go with something around 0.365 for the value here. And let's reduce this down to like minus 0.0025. And let's do a roughness of like maybe something super or more reflective, so 0.1, 0.2. And then metallic needs to be set at 1 as well. So we're getting a more shiny metal, and then we're going to mask this out. So let's add a black mask, and then let's add a generator, and let's use the metal edge wear generator. And then in here, let's just see, let's try 0.5, reduce this down a little bit, but increase the contrast. And triplanar we can leave. Grunge amount, maybe increase this a little bit, 0.5, leave the scale at 4, and then masking, crank this all the way up to like 0.99. And now we're getting this, this edge here, which is looking pretty good, I would say. Can also mess with the curvature settings here and kind of like try to find different settings. It's looking a bit too repetitive and procedural, so let's add another fill layer on top and set this one to multiply. And then let's get a texture. Let's just do grunge map and maybe try 09, this one here, and just increase the tiling to something like 5. And that should mask out a lot of the areas already. So we're getting a bit more repetition. And, you know, maybe crank the balance up just a little bit. Maybe leave it at 0.5 actually. And what that gives us is, you know, just a little bit more edge damage in general. So if I go to color mode, you're able to see it here as well, where it's just adding a little bit of this like edge damage to it. And let's try to set this to soft light, or maybe try linear dodge add, and then crank down the intensity. Maybe 25, or let's do 22. And we can tweak this later on as well. Let's rename that to metal edge, metal bright edge damage or something like that. And just leave it at that. So next I want to add a bit of grime around the decals so that it looks like, because they stick out, maybe some dirt has accumulated around them. And I'm just gonna save some time here and be lazy and make another anchor for all the decals by just duplicating this decals layer. So I'm gonna press Ctrl D. And once it has copied, we can just clear the mask. And then let's call that one decals anchor. And then let's go in here. And let's make this a bit bigger, go all the way down. And let's add a fill layer at the bottom of this. And we're only gonna affect the color channel, set the base color to black, and then let's look at the base color for now. Actually, we want to set this to white, not to black. And now we're going to build up our mask here. So the first thing is the decals graph that we have here. So let's go in here. Let's crank this up to normal so that we get the black. That's all that I want from this one. And then we have decals warning 01. So what we can do here is just add a fill layer. And in that fill layer, we're just gonna turn everything off and set this to pass through. And then we're going to add a filter, and we're going to, sorry, not a fill, but a filter. And we're going to add a HSL perceptive. And in here we can bring down the saturation and bring down the lightness. And now this is black. So there we go. Then we have everything in decal legs. Going to do the same thing here. Add a fill layer. Turn everything off. Set it to pass through. And then we're going to add a filter and going to add a HSL perceptive only on color. Turn this down. There we go. Got our decal arrows. So I guess on this one we need to do the same thing. Add a fill layer. Add filter. HSL perceptive. Bring this down. And set it to pass through. There we go. And we've got danger. Not really sure where this guy is just now. I think it's one of these here. Yeah, there we go. So let's actually just clear the mask. Doesn't really matter if the detail is in there or not. And then same here. We can just add a fill. A little bit tedious, but should be done pretty soon. And then add a filter, HSL perceptive, crank down the saturation and the lightness. And, you know, we can just Control D to duplicate that layer, and we can add that to the Danger 2 layer. Which is this guy. And we got that one. Do the same thing, duplicate this guy. Drag this all the way on top here. Got the explosive. Same procedure, Control D. And then bring it in here. Decal grenade. Same thing, Control D. Bring that in here. And that should be it. Everything should be black and white now, which is the case. Turn off the glow for now. And then let's add another fill layer on top. Turn everything off. Set it to pass through, and then we're going to add an anchor point and call that decals mask. And maybe let's call it decals grime mask. And then we can add a fill layer on top of the anchor layer. And we can actually turn off the visibility of that anchor layer and call this decals grime. Let's turn off everything but color and roughness, and then we're going to add a black mask and then a fill, and then we're going to go to anchor points, look for the decals grime mask, and we're going to set this to base color, and then we can add a filter and look for invert, and now you can see we have just the decals in a black and white mask, which is pretty great. So let's keep working with this a bit. First, we're going to add another filter, and we're going to look for a blur filter. And then we're going to crank up the intensity. Maybe we're going to do 1 with 2. And then let's add another, well, actually, let's leave it at 2 for now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add another fill layer. And we're going to use the anchor point for the grime. And we're going to set this to multiply. And now it's masking out the center of the decals. And we're only getting grime around it. And then we can also change the base color. Maybe try a brownish type color. Something like this. Probably don't want it too saturated. And then crank up the roughness. Maybe 0.6. And so that's a little bit of grime. Let's see what this is giving us. Yeah, just a bit of dirt. And what we can do as well is we can add another fill layer. And let's just look for a grunge map again. Let's do dust. Let's try dust spread. And we're going to set this to multiply. So let's check out the mask actually. And then let's take a look at the balance here. And let's also set this to triplanar projection and crank this up. So now we're getting a bit of dust. And this is nice because it just breaks it up, but it's still very even. So I want to add another fill layer. And we're going to set this to multiply as well for now. And let's look for just another grunge map, something that has a lot of contrast and is a bit irregular. Maybe this. And let's actually set this to subtract. And now it's getting rid of some of these irregularities, or it makes it more irregular. So let's set it to triplanar. Maybe try tiling of 2 and then mess with the balance a bit. So we get something like this, which I do like. Could almost be more intense, which we could do by just adding a levels on top of everything. And then also add a blur on the whole thing. Maybe do small blur value. So you got a little bit of dirt here. It's probably still a bit too saturated. So let's just bring down the saturation and maybe bring down the color as well. And then let's duplicate this whole layer. So Control D. And go in here and then get rid of that top levels and blur. And then underneath here, we're going to crank up the blur. And let's see what that gives us. Just adds a bit more, which is good. But then let's play with some of these fill or these grunges. So let's just see. This is the first one. It's the grunge dust. Can probably leave that, but let's actually set this to 3 just so that we get a different one on this one. And then for this guy, we can do 3 as well. And then let's see what this is doing right now, actually. Okay, I'm not seeing much right now. Let me figure out why that is. So we've got this, and this right now is not doing much. So it's probably related to yeah, we need a bit more contrast here. So let's do a levels as well. Drag this all the way over. Let's see what that looks like. So now we're getting something. And this is obviously a bit much. It's in areas where it's not supposed to be. So let's check out what's going on. Is that because of the blur? Yeah. So let's reduce the blur to maybe 3. And actually leave that one at 4. And then here, let's play with the balance. And so we're getting a bit more. Maybe for this guy, just set this to 75. So we have a bit of a grime buildup for these. Which, yeah, let's add the glow back on, and then let's make a mask, or a folder group. And then we can turn this on and off once we move it in here. And maybe on this whole group we can also do a black mask, or let's do a white mask. And then we're going to do a fill, and let's introduce another grayscale that just to add some more variation. So let's see what this is giving us. It's reducing quite a bit, so let's see what we can. Well, first let's set it to triplanar again, and use like value of 3, and then let's look at the balance. So here is no changes. If we bring it down, it's getting rid of a bit of the stuff. So let's try 0.7, or maybe make this a little bit bigger and dock this down here. Let's try 0.75. Might be a bit much. 0.85. And then add filter and add a blur and do like a maybe 0.2. To a really small blur value. And just turn this down to like 90%. On the base color, let's check out the roughness. Let's go to the roughness channel and crank this down to 90% as well. And this is just a start. We can tweak this later on if we need to. But now we have some grime around the decals, which is great. All right, we're done with our base texture, and as you can see, this is all set up nicely, so we can go back and make changes to it later on. So the first thing that I want to do is check all the channels. And right now, if we turn on the emissive channel, you can see there really isn't any information in here other than in these areas. So let's fix that. Let's go back to material view and make a new folder. And let's actually call that one glow all. And then we're going to drag that glow group into the glow all. So left click and drag that in there. And then in here, let's add a new fill layer and move it in here. And let's actually move that below the glow group. And then what we can do on that fill layer, we're going to call that glow base. And we want to add emissive information everywhere because we need to mask it out. So you see how right now there's no emissive information here, and now we're giving emissive information to everything. So by default, that's black because we don't want anything to be emissive. And then we need to bring back the emissive information on this layer again. So for the glow base, we're just going to turn on emissive, and we're going to bring that to white. And now we're getting that information from the other channels on top. So let's move back to material view and make sure we didn't mess anything up. So that's looking good. And the only other thing we might want to adjust is actually the, let's take a look at some of the colors here and what we're getting. So let's just look at base color, and base color looks fine. This is coming from the emissive shader, so we're good in with the emissive. Before we export everything, one thing I want to do is I want to add a fill layer on top of everything, and we're going to set that to pass through. And we're also going to go to the height channel, set that to pass through. We're going to go to the roughness channel, set that to pass through, and we're going to go to metallic, set that to pass through. And then what we're going to do is turn off all the layers for now. And then we're going to call that sharpen. And then we're going to right mouse button and add filter. And we're going to look for the sharpen filter. And you can see once we add that, everything gets really, really sharp, which is nice. So if we turn off the color, it won't sharpen the color. If we turn off the roughness, it won't sharpen the roughness. So we really want to sharpen color and roughness information. The rest of the stuff we don't really want to sharpen. So let's bring back let's bring down the sharpen intensity a little bit. I feel like it's a little much. Maybe try 0.6. And then you can see we probably should do some changes to the dust here. This looks pretty intense. So let's go all the way back down to our plastic material and look for the dust speckles, which is this layer. So the first thing we want to do is probably bring down the height. And then also, let's switch this to base color. And let's bring this down to 10% intensity so that it's not as visible. And let's check out the roughness channel. Switch this to roughness. And maybe bring this down a little bit as well. 75%. So you can see we're just reducing the intensity of these things a little bit. And then also you can see we're getting a lot of noise on some of these decals. So let's just take a look at the decals grime layer. Not the decals grime layer, but the actual decals layer. And let's just go in here. And let's take a look. So here's our grime. Let's bring this down a tad to maybe 50% or even 40%. And then also make this a little bigger. And let's see. Probably work with the balance again. Maybe more something like this, just to not have a ton of damage on there, because it feels a bit artificial. And I also want to go back to my plastic and then take a look at the scratches. So these guys here, for the base color, let's bring this down to 25. And let's also reduce the height a little bit. And then go to the roughness. Switch this to roughness here as well. And you can see this is pretty intense. So we can either just use the slider to bring the roughness back. Which is probably what we should do. So maybe just set this to 0.6 for now. And let's see what that gives us. And these are just some tweaks. We can still go back and forth later on and kind of like bring out more of the weathering if we want, or we can add more stuff. But for now, let's just consider this our base setup and export everything, or export our textures next. So to export, all you need to do is go to File and then click on Export Textures. That brings out the Export Textures dialog. And you can choose from different presets under output template if you want to use a specific game engine. But I want the actual channel information for each channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Reset All, and that switches the output template to document channels plus normal plus AO, no alpha, which is exactly what I want. Under size, you can change your size. I'm going to crank it up all the way to 8K. So we're exporting 8K textures for our model, and padding we're going to set to dilation infinite, which will extend our texture borders. And here is the directory where it's going to put everything. You should put that into a folder that you're comfortable with. I'm going to leave it here and load in the textures in Blender from this directory. So that's it. Next, you're just going to click export. And then you can see it's generating base color, emissive, height, metallic, ambient occlusion, normal OpenGL, roughness, and decal alpha. A lot of those we actually don't need, so we could go ahead and make our own custom template, but we just don't need to load the ones into Blender that we don't need. So that's going to be fine. Since this is a 8K texture, you can see it's taken a bit of time. It's gathering all the texture channels and stuff. But once it's done, it writes out all the textures, and at the end of it, it says write finalization. So it's going to take a second to calculate, and then it's going to be done. So next, we're going to move to Blender and bring the textures in.